for the Episcopal Women's History Project annual meeting. It is my humble pleasure to be the president of this organization. And so I will begin by asking you to remember that we ask you to pay your dues if you choose to become part of us. I hope you will. Let's pray together the woman's prayer, and I'll leave you on mute and I'll read it. Do you have? I'm waiting for Yane to get the prayer up.
I can do it if you want.
Do the rest of you have the prayer? Okay.
Jane, I have the ability to share it if you'd like.
Would you do that?
Yes, ma'am. Can you all see it?
Yes.
There you go.
Praying the woman's prayer. O God, creator of all life, bless the unsung lives of countless Christian women in every century who were your hands and feet, who kept alive your compassionate presence by feeding the hungry, nursing the sick, clothing the naked, comforting the sad, praying and petitioning, strengthening those in prison, teaching the stories, sowing and singing, weeping and rejoicing. Grant us the wisdom to discern our ministries in this day as our foremothers found theirs. Lead us in new and timeless forms of discipleship, and let us joyfully find our place in this procession of praise, offering our varied gifts and voices together with them and Mary, the mother of our Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. Okay, well, I want to just say how thankful I am for those of you who are with us and wanting to be part of this day. EWHP stands for Saving the History of Women in the Episcopal Church, and our mission statement says it best. The Episcopal Women's History Project honors women's ministries in the Episcopal Church by listening, recording, and continuing to tell our stories. Before we begin the official meeting, I want to introduce to you two new board members that have come on recently. Pan Adams McCaslin. Let's see if I can get Pan to, Pan. And Heather Huck. Do we see Heather? There she is. There she is. Okay. We look forward to you coming on the board, and I think you're coming on at a time when there's some really good dynamic things happening. So thank you for the willingness to serve. Next, I want to ask Judith if she would, to present the treasurer's report.
Certainly, I'll be glad to do that. And you'll all be glad to know that it's going to be brief, right? Okay. And we'll get on to bigger and better things. I'm basically going to share my screen right now and bring up a balance sheet just to show you. Can you all see that?
Yes.
All right. So it's important as we begin this phase of our work after the annual meeting to take a look, I believe, at what we have available. And I'm going to just briefly have you take a look at where we have our funds. And then to say something a little bit after this, if there's no questions, about a new committee that we'll be looking at. So we currently bank, and I know you're all excited, with Bank of America, so that wherever the treasurer is, there's an office and a bank throughout the country. We have a fund, the first one, that has a little under $900. It's designated for expenses of EWHP. The second fund is where we get our grants from, our money. If we issue a grant, the payment of that comes out of that next fund, that money market account designated for grant. And then to be able to write checks, you need to have a checking account. And currently, as of the end of August, we had about $3,400, which meant we had liquid funds that I don't need to reply or ask anyone else for, in the amount of 16,000, roughly 900. However, thanks to prior supporters of EWHP, we have at this time approximately I got to get it out, 6,271 shares in the investment fund that DFMS manages. And that right now, at the beginning of May, the value was, and they're delayed a little bit, market value was $182,000. Now, I'm not even going to go into the market, okay? It's going to go up and down and roundabout, and I can't have anything whatsoever to do about it. We have a small liquid portion that is in there, what they consider money market. So if we give a substantial grant that I don't have liquid, I ask them to send me money into our checking account, which they do almost overnight. And then that small little prepaid is our deposit for our retreat that the board is going to take, hopefully, in April of next year. And that wraps it up, so that almost $200,000 is what we are holding on to at this time for our mission and ministry of EWHP. And whereas it seems a huge amount of money, we want to be as generous as we can be. And that's why grants are now being re-given and awarded. And after COVID, we're accumulating people who need and finding groups. And we want to be able to do this work, not to be limited by that amount of money, but to be able to do this work for coming years. So if there are any questions about this balance sheet, and I would gather people could raise their hand. That's do they have the ability to do that, Yane?
Yes.
I don't know.
Yes.
All right.
But
Either
also
that,
it
or
would
they
be
can.
it would be better if people can leave their questions in the chat.
All right, so I'll have to go look at the chat. Hold on.
There's no questions so far.
Okay, good. That's even better. So what I wanted to finally say is that we have begun just recently a new fundraising committee on how to raise funds to continue the work of this group and this organization, so that we can support those that follow us in looking at the work of those that came before us or are going on right now. And you'll hear more about that. But if you want to assist in this or have great ideas, please reach out to me. My email address, I'll ask Yane if she could put it in the chat room, and I'll use my work email at the Diocese of Delaware. And I will be glad to put you on with me on this committee, and we shall see what great works we can do. And I've stopped sharing.
Thank you, Judith, very much.
You're welcome.
Really appreciate you. Judith is outstanding in the job that she does for us.
Oh, You're welcome.
It's true. It's true. Okay, next I want to ask Connie to talk to us about the Grants and Scholarships Committee. We haven't had really a very active committee until this year. We did things here and there, but now it's really, really going, and I really appreciate that. And I want to say, before she starts to speak, Sandra Squires was the chairman for a while, and she kind of got it going. And as the train left the station, Constance got on. So this is, and Sandra remains on the committee. So thank you both very much. I turn this over to you, Constance.
Thank you. So the Grants and Scholarship Committee is responsible for administering EWHP's grants and scholarship, which of course is one of EWHP's core ministries. So it's a good committee to be on. We are doing, I think, good work now. In addition to me, the other members of the committee are Dr. Sandra Squires, the Reverend Deacon Cecily Sawyer Harmon, and the Reverend Dr. Cheryl Kujawa Holbrook. And I would say we are a congenial group and we get our work done. We meet primarily through email and an occasional Zoom. EWHP has a number of grants available to support primarily research and publication on the history of women in the Episcopal Church, and they're all listed on the EWHP website. Our application form is pretty straightforward and easy to follow. We're not asking people to do applications to the level of, say, the NEH or something like that, but we get the information we need. We operate on a rolling basis. There's not a real deadline. Basically, once an application is presented to us, the committee evaluates it. And if it's ready to go, we'll have the full board approve it at the next regular meeting. Or if the application is not quite ready for prime time, we will send it back to the applicant with suggestions and recommendations and ask them to resubmit. Last year, we gave out one grant, a Frank Sagano grant that went to the community of St. John Baptist in Amendham, New Jersey, to support the publication of the second volume of the History of the Order in the U.S. The community of St. John Baptist started in England in the mid-19th century and came over here in the late 19th century, and they're still active. Their second volume had a number of obstacles, but it came out this summer, and it is available for purchase on Amazon. The book is called The Second Spring, The Community of St. John Baptist in America from 1940 to 2020, and the author is Valerie Bonham. And so our grant to them for this to cover all the publication expenses was a little over $6,000, which was, the sisters really needed it because COVID really killed their source of income, since they depend a lot on income from retreats and people coming for quiet days and things like that. So they had no money during COVID, and we were able to provide them a great service by funding this publication. This year, we gave a Frank Sagano grant to the Reverend Deacon Daphne Noyes, who is here attending this meeting. I see her face on the screen, so it's good to see you, Daphne. And her grant is to fund research on a woman named Adeline Blanchard Tyler, who was the first woman in the U.S. who was set aside as a deaconess in the mid-1850s. This happened in Maryland. And Deaconess Tyler is a fascinating person from what I've learned about her, and Daphne's doing great work researching her. Deaconess Tyler's life is important for the history of the church, but she was active in many other areas of life. So this is going to be an important book when it comes out on women's history as well, because the deaconess was involved in early hospital administration and other philanthropic works in the mid to late 19th century. And the grant was used to fund a research trip to repositories to the Maryland Historical Society and the Diocese of Maryland Archives in Baltimore. So this is a great project that we're glad to be able to support. I'll mention also grants that were given a few years back, I think in the late teens, like 20 teens. There were 2 Catherine Jefferts Shorey grants to Margot Guernsey for a full-length film, documentary film that she's doing on the Philadelphia 11. And we're glad to be part of the support of this project. The film is still being worked on, so stay tuned, and it will be forthcoming at some point. But films are big projects. Now, one of a constant issue for us is getting the word out about what we do. Well, this summer we did a big publicity blitz about our grants to various places in the church and also in the scholarly community. And that's resulted in a number of inquiries. And I believe it will also lead to some successful applications. And I'm looking forward to us being able to spend more money on these good projects. Another new venture for us that we started just last year, and it's still very much a work in progress, is the Reverend Dr. Matilda Dunn Scholarship. Matilda Dunn was active in EWHP for a number of years. She was the president. She was the person who spearheaded the conference on women of color in the church in 2017. Well, alas, Matilda Dunn left us in January of 2021, and EWHP decided that the way we would like to honor her memory would be to create a scholarship in her name, and a scholarship that really is directly connected to who Matilda was. So the scholarship is for $1,000, and it's open to women who identify as Anglican or Episcopalian, who are non-traditional students at a school of higher education to any level from community college through graduate school. We chose these qualifiers because Matilda Dunn herself was a woman of color, an immigrant. She was a non-traditional student. She finished her bachelor's degree sort of as she could, among working it around being a wife and mother and following her husband's career. And she went to seminary in midlife. So her educational path was a bit challenging at times. So these qualifications do reflect Matilda Dunn's life and situation. The scholarship is unrestricted as to its use. The recipient may use it for either school fees or living expenses. And if you're a non-traditional student, having it available for living expenses can be very important. Now, a non-traditional student, just to get those parameters in mind, is a person who meets any one of these qualifications: delayed entrance to college, working full-time while attending school part-time at least some of the time, being financially independent in terms of student aid, being financially responsible for family members other than a spouse, maybe children or your parents or your siblings, or being first-generation person to attend college. Now, so far, we have not yet received any applicants for the scholarship. Partially, it's because this is a new venture for us, and we're also trying to reach a new population of people. We've certainly sent out information about the scholarship to a number of places where women of color might be, where they might know about women of color, like HBCUs and some Native American places. So this is a work in progress. So in conclusion, I think the best thing to say is that we have our grants and scholarship available. We want to give them out, to share what we have, to encourage students, to encourage people doing good research. So if you know of anyone who might benefit from a grant or benefit from our scholarship, I noticed that Yang just put my email up on the chat. We'd love to hear from you. And once we know of a possible interested person, we'll take it from there, because this is what we're here for, is to encourage women and encourage women's history. So if they have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them. You're muted, Joanne.
Sorry.
There you go.
Seeing that there are no questions, since her email is there, please do take a moment to give her an email if there was a question or if you're interested in learning more about the scholarships yourself. Next, we're going to go to what is really an exciting part of this meeting, and that is the awards. It has been several years since we have given out any of our awards. In fact, the last one given was an Adelaide Teague Case Award to Matilda Dunn, and that was in 2019. So we're just excited that we can do this. Two of these awards are new, but two of them are awards that have been part of this organization for many years, and we are following along and doing giving this out, as is our mission. The first one I want to give is the Ruth Alexander Award for History in a Published Work. It is a $1,000 award, and it will be given to the Reverend John Rawlinson, whose article about Jean Johnson, deacon, appeared in the Historiographer in August 2021. I give this award to you, and we will be giving you the monetary amount very soon. Would you like to say just a couple of words, John?
People who know me know that's an oxymoron, John, in a few words.
Oh dear.
But minor correction, Jean was not a deaconess. She was a seminary professor.
Okay.
Of great depth, great breadth, and a very creative person. And very much ignored. And I encourage people to read the article. I would say one thing just in general, a general plea I make in historic terms. And that is, it seems to me the ministry of the church is a priestly ministry, not in the ordained sense, but in the larger biblical sense of the priesthood of all believers. And for me, that priesthood is to help give meaning to life. And in that sense, it seems to me the historian's task is not simply to say, what did somebody do? Did this on that date, did that on the other date, but to say, what does it mean? What is the value of knowing what that person did? Because in looking at the meaning, we give meaning not only to that person's life, but we gain a sense of meaning and a sense of possibility for the future by embodying that meaning in contemporary terms. And I hope that's what you'll see in that article about Jean, that not only did she teach, not only was she a gifted teacher, but part of the meaning of that is she inspired students themselves to be creative, to be experimental, and to push the envelope beyond the traditional realms of normal classrooms. So one minor thing also, I'm sorry that Cheryl Gojoa Holbrook is not present on this. I would hope you would look forward to an article that unfortunately I unloaded onto her in an imposing way, because it's 1/3 longer than she has space for, and I don't know how to cut it, so it depends on her to do it. But it's about a deaconess, and I see Fran Toy on the call.
Mhm.
Fran would know. This was Deaconess Emma Britt Drant, who remarkably initiated and established 3 different congregations in 2 different places and lived a remarkable life. The article is pending somehow between Cheryl and I to edit it down, losing 1/3 of the content, unfortunately. But I thank you all very much for this recognition, for pointing to the importance of the lives of people who have been ignored, denied, set aside, excluded, and in a variety of ways dealt with as though they are unimportant, when in fact they have been central to the ministry of the church. Thank
John,
you.
thank you so much. You just said it so well. I really appreciate you, and we're happy to give you this award. The next award is a brand new award. It's the Joanna Gillespie Award for Creativity. And Joanna was one of the co-founders of EWHP, and she's the one who created the prayer, the woman's prayer that we say at every gathering. We give this new award to Pan McCaslin. Pan has been a dear friend of mine for many, many years, and I have seen her in her work in the parish. I've seen specifically myself her work in the diocese. I was on the Commission of Ministry with her for 10 years. She was the chairman and did a fabulous job. And she moved from our diocese to another and got completely involved there. And she also has been very active in the national church and was on the, what is it, give me the letters, PD, the committee. Anyway, she chaired the committee, finance committee, and she just, everywhere she steps, she shows creativity in our church. So I would like to thank her very much and give her the new Joanna Gillespie Award, and ask if you have a few words to say, Pam.
Thanks, Joanne, and thanks to the board. I was really touched when I got notified about this honor, and it came as I rotated off after 7 years as chair of the Board of Archives of the Episcopal Church. But I've been involved with the archives since, around 2008, I think, when we began the process of saying, what do we need to do with our precious documents and how do we house them? During the pandemic years, we were able to move the archives to an interim location in Austin. And there are lots of opportunities now for people to be able to access our records in different ways. The digital system is up and running now, which is just wonderful. I got invited to join the board of EWHP, and it just seemed like the logical next step, because I really believe that, number one, we've got to honor our history and honor the work that happens in our church, so that we can then reach out in new and different ways to offer God's work in our world as our world keeps evolving. And so we need to know our history, and we need to be those ministers in the world. So I appreciate this greatly. Thank you.
Thank you, Pan, and we look forward to having you on the board. I want to say also that Pan was one of our speakers at our first Lenten series. She talked about the life of Peggy Bosmeyer, who was the first woman priest in Arkansas. And so you will find Pan popping up here and there everywhere. And it's good to be friends with her and be part of her life. The next award that we're giving, is one that has been going on since the beginning of this organization. But we are doing something a little bit different this time. The Adelaide Teague Case Award has been given to someone who dedicates herself to ministry for and with women. And it has traditionally always been given every third year, coinciding with the General Convention. And the last one that was given in the traditional way was Matilda Dunn, and she got the award in 2019, I believe. But because of COVID, we're doing something different. There are two women who have died since COVID, not from COVID, but in this period of time. And neither of them received this wonderful award for their service. So we decided this year to give both of these women the award posthumously, but so remembering all the wonderful good that they have done, especially for EWHP, but also outside in the church and in their parish, in their diocese, whatever. But the first award is going to Susan Johnson. Susan had been on this board, and she had been the president, and she worked hard all the time. She is the one that we can thank fully for bringing Artisma Boden's name to holy women and holy men. She worked strenuously to get people behind her and presented at convention, and Artisma now has a day in the calendar, which, by the way, just happened recently, and our own Robin Sumners and her husband were able to be at the college in San Antonio where she had taught, where her ministry lied, and they were opening a new place named for her. And so we are giving this grant in her name to the St. Philip's College in San Antonio. And so they received the award from Robin. I can't remember the date. If Robin would give that to me, I'd appreciate it. But anyway, we are so fortunate to have known Susan and to be able to give this award. We also give the award, equally deserving, to the Reverend Barbara Schlachter, who had been on this board and had worked for years in the church, out of the church. She just had a fire under her for helping people and making the world a better place. In talking to her husband, who I asked him to find the ministry that he thought that she would be the happiest to receive the award and that she's given here today. And her grant is going to go to a place called 100 Grannies for a Livable Future. Isn't that a wonderful name for a ministry? And she founded this, and it was for environmental justice. And one of the things they have been busy on and active in is stopping the oil pipeline. So if Mel is here, I know he was. Mel, would you like to just say a few words on Barbara's behalf?
Sure.
Okay.
It was a surprise to get your phone call about this, and a very pleasant surprise. Barbara was inspired for 100 Grannies after she read one of the books by James Hansen, who was a NASA engineer and scientist, who commented at one point that he was doing his work really for his grandchildren, and that he was hoping that the world would become a better place and the climate would get under control, so that his grandchildren would have a better world. And that really struck her. So there began her customary way of gathering women together, which she's done how many times. And there began 100 Grannies for a Livable Future. 100 Grannies, I mean, Barbara died in 2016, and 100 Grannies has only gotten stronger since. They're convinced she's still with them, and they may not be wrong. So the two poles of their activity tend to be the activist climate change kinds of things that you mentioned with the pipelines. A few of them have gotten arrested over it. And then they have a serious educational side too, both for grown-ups and for kids. So they have regular film or speaker series here in Iowa City on different environmental issues, and we've got a host of experts in this place. So they're not short of candidates, and they've previewed some pretty good films too. And then at some of our outdoor festivals, why they can be seen under a tent doing things with kids to bring them to some environmental conscience and consciousness. So they look forward. When I broached this grant reception to them, why they got excited. They have a project going potentially with the city of Iowa City, and they so it will allow them to fund a special project that they otherwise wouldn't be able to. So it's going to keep going very actively. And by the way, they've for a long time had a lot more than 100 Grannies. It's really, I mean, you get Grannies together and, you know, they multiply.
You're right about that.
So this is well received. My daughter was here, Erica Sword, but I think she had to duck into a meeting at work. So she wanted to be remembered. And my son may have had the same fate, Jake. So anyway, we're all excited about this.
Well, thank you, Mel, for being with us for receiving this award, and thank you for thanking Barbara in heaven for all the things she's doing to continue to work in this organization.
Mm-hmm.
The last award is also one of our new awards. It is the Every Woman Counts Award, and it is given it was created after Susan's death, Susan Johnson. And we're giving it to the Reverend Gay Jennings, whom I think everybody knows, who has finished her time this year as the president of the House of Deputies. It's an incredible job, and I'm sure she has taking deep breaths and say, after this is over. But we all do follow you and appreciate all that you have done for the church. And so I'm going to ask Gay to give a special talk to us and tell us about her, what it's meant to her to be the president of the House of Deputies, what she sees about the church. Just whatever you think is the most important that we need to hear. Gay.
Thank you so much. It's a delight to be here. I see lots of people I've known over the years, and a number of people I hope I get to know better soon. So, and I just love the name of the award, Every Woman Counts. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the figures of forgotten women, because I'd rather talk more about them and maybe a little less about me, but I'll talk about me as well. So now a little bit about my story with some reflections on the leadership of women in our beloved church, which is sometimes late to the party in terms of inclusion, but works mightily to catch up once they get there, right? So I was a young woman of 23 when I went to see the Bishop of Central New York to tell him I was going to seminary. It was August of 1974, and I'd already been accepted at the Episcopal Divinity School in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I was going on my own self-devised trial year. But the rector of my parish said I should let the bishop know of my plans. So I met with Bishop Ned Cole, who looked a bit like Methuselah, and I told him what I was doing. I met with Bishop Cole just 2 weeks after the ordination of the Philadelphia 11, one of whom was resident in Central New York. Bishop Cole, although in favor of the ordination of women, was not amused. And he said, "Young lady, why exactly are you here? What do you want from me?" And I responded by saying, I came because my rector told me I had to come see you. And so here I am, and I don't want anything from you. And he laughed and replied, "You are the first person in a long time to come see me who doesn't want anything." He then looked at me over the bridge of his bifocals and asked me a question that I somehow knew was important to him. He said, "Gay, what will you do if you aren't ordained?" I looked him square in the eye and said without hesitation, "Something else." And he burst out laughing and told me he hoped he would be the first to know if I decided I wanted to be ordained. I didn't tell him that I was still a member of the Presbyterian Church, and that seemed irrelevant since I'd been attending the Episcopal Church on and off for a couple of years when I was home from college, but that's a whole nother story. I went off to Episcopal Divinity School in Cambridge, Massachusetts for seminary, and my trial year turned into 3. And while I was there, I met at a poker game the man who has now been my husband for 46 years. Albert and I were married on August 14th, 1976, just before my last year in seminary and a few weeks before the historic 65th General Convention. After taking our honeymoon and moving into a new apartment in Cambridge, I made the first of many governance-related requests to which my extraordinarily patient husband has agreed over the past 4.5 decades. "Honey, could you set up the apartment while I go to Minneapolis to see what will happen?" He agreed. So, because the 65th General Convention in 1976 made the canons governing ordination equally applicable to men and women, I've served the church as an ordained person for more than 40 years. And I've been very fortunate. I've never done the same job twice. I was a hospital chaplain, a parish priest, worked on a bishop's staff for many years, worked for Credo, a conference program, a wellness program that Pan and I served on together out of the church pension fund, and then was elected president of the House of Deputies. The church we all love did something else when it passed the canon. Now, I have a confession. When I was ordained so long ago, I thought that was the big story, that women could be ordained. But I was wrong. I was really wrong. The primary reason I could even be ordained was because of the witness and persistence of lay women. But I did not fully appreciate that as a young ordinand. The history of the witness and persistence of lay women is rich, as so many of you know, and I thank EWHP for keeping so much of that history alive. In the 46 years since that, and it was tense, I was there watching from the bleachers, since that tense day in Minneapolis, the leadership of women, lay and ordained, has changed the church. The way we govern ourselves and the way we understand broader issues of inclusion. The movement for women's leadership established networks, it generated momentum, and it raised up leaders who pushed for the full inclusion of gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people in the life of the church. It insisted that we deal with clergy sexual misconduct and galvanized other movements for justice. The truth I've come to understand these 46 years later is that my story begins not with the struggle for women's ordination, but with the struggle for women to take their rightful place in the governance of the church by serving in the House of Deputies. That movement began, as many of you know, in 1910. And some think we didn't get the job done until 1970, when women were seated as deputies. But for one convention in 1946, a woman named Elizabeth Huntington Dyer from the Diocese of Missouri was seated in the House of Deputies. And her bishop, Bishop William Scarlett, which is such a perfect name for a bishop, put her up to it. She was the sister of a priest and the niece of a bishop. And the people who wanted to see women take their place in the councils of the church thought she'd be hard to turn away. She served at that convention, but by 1949, the opposition had organized 4 duly elected women, one each from the dioceses of Nebraska, Olympia, Missouri, and Puerto Rico, were denied seats in the House of Deputies. And then there was another woman who's still living from the Diocese of Los Angeles, who was elected to the special convention in 1969 and was also denied seat, although she was then seated in 1970. The convention in 1949 decided to handle the controversy in that most Anglican of ways, appointing a commission. And this commission has my favorite name for any group ever appointed in the church. Its formal name was the Joint Commission to Consider the Problem of Giving the Women of the Church a Voice in the Legislation of the General Convention. Perfect name. Its report is in the Journal of the 1952 General Convention, and I commend it to you, especially if you are a student of the many and varying ways the church can avoid committing justice. You won't be surprised to learn that the Joint Commission to Consider the Problem of Giving the Women of the Church a Voice in the Legislation of the General Convention did not solve the problem it was convened to address. In fact, every General Convention between 1943 and 1964 rejected resolutions to seat women. In 1964, the bulwark that male deputies had constructed began to crumble. And some of you know the story of how it finally fell. The wrecking balls included grace, shame, and money. Dr. Pam Darling tells the story in her book, New Wine, and I relied on that chapter when I wrote a chapter on this subject in Looking Forward, Looking Back, a book of essays edited by Dr. Frederica Harris Thompson, a mentor of mine, a deputy, a laywoman, and longtime seminary professor. The book was to mark the 40th anniversary of the ordination of women. And it's a story full of lessons for the pursuit of equality in the church. And here's what Pam said. Is what she wrote. Time after time, the women of the triennial politely petitioned, and time after time, the deputies refused, as each convention duly performed the rituals of deference and power embedded in the United Thank Offering, modestly presented by the women and magnanimously received by the men. Power does not bow to deference, she wrote, and it was not until a greater power was exerted in the form of the increasingly embarrassing distances between secular and church practices highlighted by presiding Bishop Lichtenberger's sharp rebuke in 1964, that the men of the convention finally voted to allow women to join them as deputies. Lichtenberger, a beloved bishop who was retiring due to ill health, spoke in firm tones to a joint session at the 1964 General Convention, pointing out to the assembled men the contradiction inherent in their refusal to seat women in spite of their willingness to accept nearly $5 million from the United Thank Offering and to adopt a document titled Mutual Responsibility and Interdependence from the 1963 Anglican Congress. He said, "What we did this morning and what we do now is reality. The other is, I believe, the unwillingness to face the fact that women are members of the body of Christ, that they are of the laity and members of the body of Christ." Later in the day, one of my predecessors, House of Deputies President Clifford Morehouse, a distinguished publisher and vocal supporter of seating female deputies, called the House to order and directed that presiding Bishop Lichtenberger's statement be read again. Despite that appeal, the deputies were unhappy with the presiding bishop's attempt to influence business in the House of Deputies and stood firm. The next General Convention in 1967, the deputies finally gave way. And here's why. They gave way. Here's why. As the ECW's financial power grew, not surprisingly, so did the women's political clout. The United Thank Offering, which had totaled just over $44,000 in 1875, was up to $2 million by 1949, and in 1951, the year of my birth, received a single donation of over $1 million in addition to smaller gifts and coins dropped into its ubiquitous blue boxes. At the 1967 General Convention, Louisa Bailey of the Diocese of Atlanta was presiding officer of the triennial, and she found herself at the center of a storm. Presiding Bishop John Hines was promoting a $9 million special program that he said would allow the Episcopal Church, quote, to take its place humbly and boldly alongside of and in support of the dispossessed and oppressed peoples of this country for the healing of our national life. Bailey had been introduced to the issue of seating women as deputies in 1955 at General Convention in Honolulu, when she was first a delegate to the Women's Triennial meeting. I heard my first debate about women being seated as deputies and walked out because I was so angry I didn't know what to do, she told Dr. Mary Sudman Donovan, who was herself a pioneer of women's history in the Episcopal Church, in an interview for the archives of the Episcopal Church in 1983. She said, in the House of Deputies, and I could only stand on the outside, looking in. With Bailey presiding in 1967, the triennial meeting voted to approve Hines' request that they contribute $3 million to the special program. So the vote took place before the two houses considered the initiative, and the women's commitment to provide a third of the necessary funding exerted tremendous influence on the debate. In short, the women, denied a role in the governance of the church, exerted their authority by influencing the budget and pushing the church to look beyond itself in ministry and mission. You will not be surprised to learn that many of the men did not like this turn of events. They complained that the women and their money were exercising too much power. Mrs. Bailey remembered, we were constantly, harassment's not a good word, but you never walked anywhere that some man who was the deputy didn't bring up the subject. She responded firmly and politely and practically by locking the doors of the triennial meeting hall. She said, some were encouraged, but others were not. And that's why we kept the doors locked, she said, because I knew some of those prominent men and they would come in and influence us. Then came the vote on admitting women as deputies. First, the House of Deputies and bishops voted in favor of seating women as deputies. As I walked down the aisle in the House of Deputies, I'll never forget the mass of men snapping pictures of me going down. It was a great day in the life of the church. And it was not Louisa Bailey. It was all the women walking down that aisle. On that day, she became the first woman to address General Convention, speaking both in the House of Deputies and the House of Bishops. So take a second to consider the magnitude of that fact. The first General Convention was held in 1785, and for 182 years, only men participated in it. For nearly 2 centuries, General Convention, the highest temporal authority of the Episcopal Church, heard and considered only the voices of men. Talk about being late to the party. During Mrs. Bailey's speech in 1967, word arrived that the House of Bishops had concurred with passage of the constitutional amendment that would allow women to be seated. And amending the church's constitution takes 2 votes of General Convention. And so after that, the story picks up 3 years later on October 12th, 1970, at the General Convention in Houston. The Journal of the General Convention tells the parliamentary story. The secretary read Message 2 from the House of Bishops, quote, which informed this House that the bishops had concurred with Deputies' message number 2 in adopting in final action the amendment of Section 4 of Article 1 of the Constitution, which, by substituting layperson for layman, removes all constitutional barriers to the seating of women as deputies in the General Convention, end quote. If anyone ever tells you that church governance is boring and pointless, you can tell them that in 1970, it was message number 2 that brought the walls tumbling down. 21 years later, in 1991, Pamela Chinnis became the first woman elected as president of the House of Deputies. And in 2012, I became the first ordained woman elected to that post. In 2018, I presided over the first general convention at which a majority of the deputies were women. And now, 52 years after women were seated as deputies, the president is a 41-year-old Latina laywoman, and the vice president is an ordained Indigenous woman. I can't wait to see how President Julia Ayala Harris and Vice President Rachel Tabor Hamilton exercise their leadership. Buckle up, church. Inspired by the New York Times overlooked series of obituaries of forgotten women, I began looking into how we remember the women who broke the barrier and gave women the vote in the Episcopal Church. The House of Deputies rules of order call for a necrology, which we now call a memorial roll, to be read and subsequently entered into the General Convention Journal. This is done at each General Convention to honor members of the House who have died since the last meeting of the House. It appeared that most of the women seated in 1946 or elected in 1949 and 1969, and eventually seated in 1970 and 1973 were not included. I looked at every journal. I did a lot of research, and it was my great honor to rectify these omissions when a special memorial roll was read at the 80th General Convention this past July. And it was powerful to hear the names of 59 lay women who had not been memorialized. There are more, so I'm continuing the research, and I plan to write about overlooked women and the forgotten history they made. There are stories remaining to be told. Just a few more thoughts. Women's leadership has helped break down other barriers. My friend Gary Hall, a seminary classmate who delayed his own ordination by a year, refusing to take orders when his female classmates could not, that's another piece of forgotten history, notes 5 ways, and I'm not going to do all 5, I promise, in which women's leadership has changed the church. I commend his essay to you. It's included in Looking Forward, Looking Backward. Gary says that the leadership of women has meant that the church has recognized what he calls the particularity of social location. I would argue, he writes, that the leadership of women clergy has been the driving force in our church's difference in all its aspects. Once men in church leadership had to recognize that their work could be done by others who did not identify as they did, they had to be open to the possibility that their own gender and racial and sexual identity were contingent and not absolute. A few years ago, I told a group of seminarians who identify as female that if we envision our goal to be the equality of ordained women in the Episcopal Church, or if we measure our progress solely by the number of female bishops, we are failing to understand the magnitude of the work God called us to. Especially now as we reckon with this crisis of racial justice in our country, we must understand that the promise of female leadership in the church will only be realized when we commit completely to dismantling racism, misogyny, homophobia, and all the interlocking oppressions that are antithetical to gospel work. I also told them to be wary of calls to respond to declining membership in a secular culture by circling the wagons, tightening up the hierarchy, and limiting the kinds of leadership we accept and the variety of voices we hear. The legacy of women in the House of Deputies has been to opened the doors not only to other women, but also to people of color, to LGBTQ people, and to younger people called to lead in our beloved church. So I thank you, all of you, for your witness and ministry over the years. It makes such a huge difference to tell the stories of the women who have shaped our identity and our witness as the church. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Gay. That was just a powerful message to all of us. It was great. We're coming to the end of the meeting, and I want just to briefly tell you about a couple things. I hope you all will look forward to our Lenten series that we will be having on Thursdays in Lent. This will be our third time we've done it. Our YouTube, EWHP YouTube site has the talks that were given at the first two Lenten series, so you can see what's going on. I'm so excited that we already have 5 of the 6 persons who are going to talk this coming Lent on board. So we really are trying to, as Gay talked so eloquently about, trying to bring the stories of people who are not heard, whose ministry has been so important in our church. And also I want to emphasize, if you probably saw it in the newsletter, that we have 3 new committees that are forming. And Judith talked about the fundraising committee. If that is something you are good at and would like to participate in, give her a call or an email. We have a new storytelling committee that I am leading. And Yane Kim is leading the special events committee. We didn't do it this last go round because of COVID, but we have a conference. The last one done was the one mentioned earlier that Matilda had spearheaded about women of color. And we right now are working with the other 2 historical organizations in the church on our Tri-History Conference that will be coming up in 2 years. But as you well know, good big conferences take a while to get going. So any of those things that you might be interested in, just give me a shout out. And last but not least, I want to hold up Robin Sumners, who is she is on the board, but she is also paid staff to do communications in the newsletters, in the website, and we're going to get to Facebook too. But she works very hard, and she's a delightful person to know and work with. So thank you, Robin, for all that you do for this organization.
Joanne, I want to say a little thing to Gay and over here. A few years ago, we did an interview with Louisa Bailey when she was 83 years old. And that is available on the EWHP YouTube. And it's not very long, but she was still at 83, a dynamite. Amazing. Thanks. And thank you so much. I love this organization.
Yes, indeed. Okay. So this ends our 2022 annual meeting. We give thanks to Almighty God for all the love He has poured out on us, and we ask that He be by our side when we try to continue the storytelling, to continue to find out who is out there, who and what they are doing, and how wonderful it is that women are such an important part of the church. Thank you, Jesus, and thank you, all of you. Amen.